The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Unconventional Therapist. I'm your host, Dave. I'm joined here with my other host, Greg. And Greg is probably the most excited I've ever seen him because today we're finally covering a topic he has been begging. And I mean begging, like it's actually a little pathetic.
Chomping at the bit.
I actually lost respect for him.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm just kidding, Greg. No, but this is an important one for you.
I think, honestly, maybe to date, one of the most important episodes.
To you.
To me. Okay, that's nice that you throw that in there. Yeah, so Dave, I'll start this with a little quote for you. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. Yeah. That's Carl Jung. And so he gets
we're doing an episode on Carl Jung?
No, absolutely not. Although... would love to at some point, but he only gets to. So here's the thing: we have to cover this person first, because the only reason why Jung gets to even talk about this concept is because the work that Freud did on the subconscious, the iceberg.
Freud's kind of like his daddy.
Freud is the daddy of them all. Freud's our daddy too.
Is he our daddy?
And according to Freud, we want to touch him.
No, murder him.
Oh, we want to murder him, and well, we'll get there, right? So Freud thinks
touch him, Greg. I don't know where you got that one from.
I don't know. It's Freudian slip.
Wait, he's not our mom.
I don't know what's going on.
And I'm not saying we want to touch our moms either, but that's what he's saying. So
this is what he's saying. He's saying a lot of that, and I cannot wait to get into that and see your thoughts around that. So
I bet you can't wait.
I can't wait. You know how I teach that Psychology 101 because they won't
I know. How could I not know? You tell me
very base.
Every time I see you, you tell me about it.
Just because I ask you to call me professor doesn't mean I'm bringing it up.
But what's the best though? You've dressed as a professor for as long as I've known you, even though you've only recently become a professor.
Dress for the job that you want. That actually works.
That's actually 100% true. Yeah. That is like you to a T.
What do I want to do next? I don't know. We'll see. So in that class, though, I talk about men like William James and Wilhelm Wundt, and they're often considered the fathers of psychology. But for me, when I'm thinking about psychology, or even especially for us, therapy, when you think of who created this, who's like the father of therapy, you've got to be only thinking of one person. You're thinking of, the cigar and the glasses and the little beard. There's no way you're not thinking of Sigmund Freud. And, he may be asking you questions like, were you breastfed? And odd things like that. But this is exactly the model that we have come to use today. So I think this is an important episode because he is the father, if not of psychology, if he's the father of modern therapy, I think.
Wow, that was really convincing when you added in, I think.
Well, I mean, without a little doubt, Dave, you know what I mean? Can't be so sure of ourselves. But what do you think about that? He's an important guy.
Oh, I think that, sure, it sounds pretty valid because of the way you said it and like the intensity you said it in.
Dave, I think you want to get into his early life. It sounds like you're really wanting to know, or maybe I need to like convince you of the importance of this guy. First of all.
Oh, you don't need to convince me. I know already.
All right. So he was born in Moravia. And May 6th, fellow Taurus.
Where's Moravia, Greg?
Yeah. Europe.
Can you show me on a map?
Eastern Europe.
What's it next to?
Germany.
Ooh.
I am winning all these. Yeah. So when Freud was 19 months old, this is something I found important. So I just picked up a few little things about his early life. We're not going to like do a huge biography here, but when he was 19 months old, his 8-month-old brother died. Yeah. And he somehow remembered being jealous of his brother like his entire life. He kind of didn't like him. But when he passed, he felt incredible shame. And that's something guilt. Yeah. Shame, guilt. I guess they're sort of.
No. I say that for a reason because that's a big thing with him.
Okay. So that happened. And that's something he's going to take with him. And from there, young Sigmund moved to Vienna when he was a child. His father was feeling the pressure to move because there was a lot of harsh treatment of Jews at the time, and they felt like Vienna was relatively friendly to Jews for the time being, of course. So Freud was super smart and started high school at age 9. Did you know that?
No.
9 years old. So pretty good. He aimed to be a neurologist, and in his 20s, he started experimenting with cocaine.
Sounds a
Not
lot
the
like
way
your background.
not the way you think, though, right? Not like some run-of-the-mill guy. No, he's like literally experimenting with it because he was finding out and understanding that it heightened your mental powers. I didn't realize that.
Ooh.
From what I've seen, it's the opposite, but the adverse effects dampen Freud's enthusiasm. So he's like, it does something to the brain. I'm interested in that, but it seems to kind of crash and not be so hot at the end.
Let me put it here in this Bunsen burner and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and then the advent of crack, right?
Thank you, Sigmund.
Sigmund Freud, the father of crack. Okay. So he eventually joins or opens a private practice in Vienna and would be an influence to other colleagues. I don't know if you've heard of them. Jung, good friend Jung, Adler, although Jung and Adler would both kind of leave him high and dry and break off from his model.
Yeah.
And of course, Frankl. So these are huge names in psychotherapy.
Oh,
and
Adler and Frankel,
and Jung.
Fans of the pod,
Absolutely.
And Jung, who we haven't covered yet, but we will.
But we obviously will.
Then he'll be a fan of the pod.
So, but do you understand that we've already talked about Adler, we've talked about Frankel, and how much though they mean to us? I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, they mean a lot to us. And this is the person who was their influence. Now they would say like, oh yeah, like this is wrong. I don't like this idea. But without him, he gathered these people. He was a beacon for these hugely important psychotherapists and actually created psychotherapy, and they started using his model in the way that it's like, okay, there's some kind of connection between physical ailments, the way people are acting, and what's going on in their subconscious.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't disagree with something and then make your own statements about it unless there's that original statement in the first place, which is
right.
A lot of what, like, it sounds like Adler and Jung kind of do, right? It's like they critique and then they kind of tailor it to the way that they see it.
Right. And isn't that just sort of what we all do with therapy? Like, we learn these theories, we learn these systems, but then we kind of like, well, I like a little bit putting this twist on it, or
Perfect example. So we both have our own version of, well, I call it the entity, and you call it the essence.
That's right.
It's essentially the same model. We're asking, but it's like I'm
just trying not to scare the shit out of people.
Yeah, and I'm trying to scare the shit out of them to cure them. But yeah, we're essentially we have the same goal in mind, but we just have two very different ways. In the end, I mean, they're not really that different. We approach both of them differently. And I think you're exactly right. That's kind of like what some of these guys do with his works as well.
Yeah, Dave, that would be like if you taught, and I love your entity, and we've done an episode on it, and it's great. But if I had, you taught me that, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it like this. This was like, Dave has a dumb idea. It's like, no, I'm using your framework.
Yeah.
And I'm creating my own. So without you, my idea can't exist, So it's unfair for people to kind of bash him. But then there is the things that he does that are kind of fair to bash him.
Well,
so first,
Greg, how old is he around this time? The private
20s
stuff.
20s. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is. So during this time, he develops psychoanalysis. Now, it didn't just happen overnight. There was a lot of trial and error, but I'll just kind of run through the important parts of psychoanalysis before we start getting into the more fun stuff. Actually, I find this fun though. So Joseph Breuer was another doctor in Vienna. I mean, I don't know why Vienna is like this hotspot for brilliant. I mean, just it's unbelievable. But he used hypnosis and verbal expression to treat emotional disorders. So he was treating conversion disorder, which is when you're so worked up or so stressed that your body.
We're going to do an episode on conversion disorder.
Like you take on. So just in a nutshell, it's like when you're having physical symptoms from a psychological or a mental, ailment, and that people had never really tried to treat physical disorders with words before. I mean, That's insane. So Joseph Brewer had the right idea, and Freud was like, okay, I like this. He's looking for traumatic events in their lives and where what the things that make them really emotional. And he said that this could contribute to their ailments. And it's like, okay. So Freud saw this work and he's thinking to himself, this guy's really onto something.
Yeah.
So he's thinking, how can we elicit this material, this self-exploration? And he finds that the key is, well, firstly, he thinks about dreams a lot, but more than that, it's free association. Like just having people, saying something and having people respond to it with whatever comes to the first thing that comes to the mind, right? So it's kind of trying to like unlock the unconscious or find the language of the unconscious. So of course, with Freud, he thought everything was related to childhood sexual experiences. I'm sure we'll get into that quite a bit. But he eventually refined it to just sexual desires. Like he thought at first anybody who had like a neurosis or a mental disorder had like a bad sexual experience, probably in childhood, right? But then he kind of just changed it to no, you just have these like weird repressed sexual feelings. And Freud himself admits to having sexual repressed feelings towards his mother and hate for his father. So
Yeah.
he kind of he kind of took this and projected it on the rest of the world.
I also heard that considering he had his private practice, like a lot of this development of this framework here, very small sample size from what I heard.
Yeah.
And it was mostly like he didn't do what we would call like that stereotypical type therapy. It was almost like doing his own research, but with a small sample size of only a few people. So it wasn't like he went far and wide and got like a bunch of different perspectives.
I think Freud's the biggest critique on it is instead of having this broader sense, he's like, for me, it was this thing. Like I had this weird sexual desire towards my mother and hate for my father. So instead of saying like, oh, this is a good framework, there's things that we're repressing or there's things in our subconscious. Maybe it's I want to impress my mother. I want to, please my mother. And maybe it's not have sex with her or whatever. Right. And I just think of it like he drew this outline with charcoal and then he blew it like, all we had to do is blow the dust away and that's the answers essentially.
Can I share something about Freud? And I hope I'm not stepping on your toes.
No, go ahead.
Any information that you're going to share. But I thought that this was a very weird contradiction to the person that we think of Freud.
Okay.
So from my understanding, Freud is actually very prudish, which you would not assume from the overtly sexual nature of his work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prudish to the point where he actually was telling his bride-to-be at the time not to read Don Quixote because of some suggestive passages that were in there.
Yeah, but why do you think he was like that? I think he was like that because he really had repressed. I think that feelings of sex or thinking about sex really brought up feelings of those unwanted thoughts he had about his mother, or at least maybe he thought. So It's like, yeah, it's strange. So he Freud needed to be in his own chair.
Yeah, he avoided sex as much as possible. Like, he was very proper with his family to the point where his kids, I forget what exactly this came about, but they were seeing some animals, and it was very clear to him that his kids didn't know where babies came from. And what do you think he did? He did not tell them where babies came from. They never heard him talk about it. And he actually, there was some statement that he thought that a nude female was very shocking and traumatic sight for males to see. And it was like just a lot of these weird thoughts about sex that are, like I said, seem very contradictory to his work.
I think he's actually hypersexual. I think that was Freud's thing. He was just, he's stuffy, he's Victorian.
Well, he was definitely like doing the work based on his own internal feelings, like you're saying. But here's another really interesting thing. Like even though all of his work was kind of had this like sexual nature to it, he was actually like not very happy with that because that was not the type of work that he was like compelled to do. So I found that very interesting because that's all we think of when we think about Freud is we think about sex, we think about like Freudian slips and all those like things about him that have to do with sex. But like he was actually more desiring to work against religion because that was like his big passion, was to kind of uh, criticize, I don't know, disprove religion.
Oh,
That
wow.
was more of his passion than anything.
That's really penetrating stuff. So it's funny that, like, it is really interesting to think of Freud as, putting this, instead of kind of like turning on himself and looking like, why am I so, sexually repressed? Like, why am I, he's probably all he ever thinks about. In fact, he mentioned something about the only useful vice is masturbation. So, the guy was, doing that quite a bit. So it's like this weird combination of outwardly very anti-sex, but definitely that's all he's thinking about all the time. And it's like seeping into his work heavily. In fact, you've heard of the Oedipus complex, right?
Yes.
So that comes from a Greek play where a man unknowingly marries his mother. Freud thought that we all internalize that idea, that we want to marry our mother and we want to kill our father. And it works the opposite with the opposite sex.
Parricide.
Right. Yeah.
Parricide is the desire to kill your father.
And he thinks on some level, until we grow and seek our own mate or, identify with the same gender, we're always going to feel that way. And then with women, it's an Electra complex. And Electra is another Greek story where Electra had an inappropriate feelings towards her father. So he would describe this in women as penis envy. Essentially, we're all dealing with repressed sexual feelings for our parents, like according to Freud, of course.
Yeah. Do you know the third? Basically inherited in primitive instinct?
No.
Cannibalism.
Really?
Yeah. So it's incest, parricide, and cannibalism are the three basic primitive man instincts that he believes we're all born with. But then we also have the desire to survive, which in order to survive, we have to kind of overpower those desires for incest, parricide, and cannibalism, which causes us guilt over those things.
Okay, so this is what I mean by
theme of guilt comes from.
Right, and this is what I mean by Freud having the framework right, because essentially, if you get rid of all the sex stuff, because for him this is true, for him like his model is fine, but we are like being driven by impulses and base level desires and wants and needs, and to exist in a society, we need to kind of find a way to overcome that, right? And use our conscious, like, okay, yeah, I do feel like I want to do this right now, but what are the consequences going to be? Like, it's like this battle that you have to have inside. It's interesting.
I always find it interesting when people, like, you kind of hear people say phrases like, "Oh, I'd like to find," like someone might say, "I would love to find a woman kind of like, like my mother," or like they throw that around, and it's like, that's kind of what Freud's talking about right there.
Also, don't say that.
Yeah, like that's a very interesting. Or sometimes people will acknowledge that, like, oh wow, like my partner really reminds me of my mother or something like that.
And then they should say after that, isn't that gross? Like, you know what I mean? That's such a strange
Freud's
thing.
right.
Yeah. So just to get back to the psychoanalysis, I have to mention that a lot of this stuff, like his major work is about dreams and the exploration of dreams. But we covered that in our dream interpretation episode. So, but that's important to mention though, because essentially what he's doing there is interpreting dreams is the same thing as interpreting what's in your subconscious, like your thoughts that pop up that you don't want to tell anyone. He wants to know what those are. So he's like, oh, like I've been having this weird thought about, I'm afraid of horses. And he's like, oh, that just means you want to have sex with your mom and we got to work on that. Right. That was like literally a case that he had. But it's just this idea of learning the language of the subconscious. Freud also believed that it was important for the therapist to sit behind the patient so that the patient can lay on the couch. And I kind of like that idea. So you can kind of feel free to say whatever without looking right into each other's eyes. I think that maybe is more conducive to open conversation. What do you think about that?
I also think that I would be wondering what is that person doing behind me the whole time, and that might be a little bit distracting.
Maybe, probably just writing. If I know therapists, right? So Freud also. So listen, this is important. Freud also believed in lay analysts. So even like including his daughter Anna, he thought that you don't need a medical degree to conduct this kind of therapy, this psychoanalysis. So what is he talking about there? He's talking about social workers and therapists. So he's saying like you don't need a medical degree to kind of do this type of work. So he really is important in developing what we do now. And there's a couple other interesting things about psychoanalysis where it was used. PTSD. So Freud didn't think electroshock therapy was the proper treatment for, what we would call PTSD now, but like shell shock, whatever. He believed that there was something about the desire to escape war, not kill people, and the sense of duty that was creating this strong conflicting emotions that led to this disorder. That's like basically on the money.
Yeah.
In the 30s.
Right.
Also, another thing is on homosexuality. He says, quote, nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. And that's also in the 1930s. But we know well that it's in the DSM until the 1970s as a mental illness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was ahead of the time.
Ahead of the time. And most of what he's criticized for is his belief that we're all trying to find this balance between our sexual desires and our need to behave in ways that are socially acceptable. But what he's also saying is we don't have to be slaves to our biology or to the way we were brought up or to our circumstances. We can explore our unconscious and see why we are the way we are, right? And we don't have to be led around. We don't have to be led around by like these things that happened to us in the past, our subconscious. Like he says something like, most of our life, our ego is never in control. Like we're driven by the super ego and the id, and we should talk about what those things are. But we're driven by desires and things that we have no idea. We don't know what's driving us. I think that's his whole point. Like unconscious drives, and for him, it's let's find out why.
Greg, I want you to repeat something.
Okay.
We don't have to be driven by our what?
By our subconscious
begins
desires.
with a B. No, it begins with a B. You already said it.
Biology?
Yeah. Let that sink in, Greg.
Oh, okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
I do.
You have made that exact opposite argument at times, and now Freud is. I'm throwing some Freud at you.
I know.
To counter some of your arguments.
I think, dude, actually, honestly, that's a very, you painted me into a corner there, but I think Freud means that a little bit differently.
I don't know.
But I don't either, right? And that's why I keep an open mind, because that's an awesome and interesting discussion that I'm sure we'll have. But I did mention the id ego and super ego.
Yes.
Now, should I describe what these things are?
Yeah, go into those bad boys.
All right. So this is, I think, Freud's most important contribution. I really do. So everyone's heard of the id, ego, and superego, but what they are is this like it's like the way that your decisions are being made, the way that your behaviors are being driven, are there's like three parts in your mind. So the id is the animalistic, hates pain, seeks pleasure. So Freud will talk a lot about the pleasure principle. Like all human beings is an organism that's avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. That's what
the id reminds me of. If I were to put like, I don't know, an analogy, it reminds me of the pagans before Christian, the Catholic Church got involved.
Yeah, hedonistic.
Hedonistic. Like they're partying. Like when we were talking about like a couple of the holiday episodes, so many of our holidays were actually like these really like fun sounding pagan rituals. That reminds me of the id. It's like that fun, just pleasure seeking side of the person, right?
Yeah, but the only thing that Freud will say about pleasure seeking is like your body, your biology, we'll use that word again, seems to like homeostasis. So if you do something that feels so great or for too long, your body's going to want to go the other way and create some darkness so that you kind of get back on level. So just like when an addict, does the drug and they feel super good, or eats the cheeseburgers, like 4 cheeseburgers, and it feels so good, you're going to feel like shit after. Your body just has a way of doing that. So if the id is, the devil on your shoulder, the pagan party animal, right?
Yeah.
Then the superego is the opposite of that. It's like your childhood morality.
It's the Catholic Church.
It's the Catholic Church. It's the rules. Dave, it's the reason why I have to staunchly disagree with Freud when he says masturbating is a great habit, because I think you might go to hell if you do it too much. You know what I mean? It's like,
and your palms are hairy now, sir.
that's right. You don't even go blind. So be careful. But that's so the superego is all like I don't know, the judge, or the societal norms that you're supposed to follow. It's the angel on your shoulder if you're the old cartoons, right? So
Yep.
it is the devil on your shoulder, the superego is the angel on your shoulder, and the ego is just how you're taking in these base impulses, right? Like, oh, I see that girl, I want to like touch her and do things with her. So that's your id, and like you don't do that though, because your super ego is like, oh, you could never do that, stay away from that, it's a terrible idea. And then your ego is somewhere in between. It's like, well, I do want to do that, but like that's not acceptable, so maybe I should talk to her and show her I appreciate her, and you know what I mean? It's like this balance. And it's interesting because when you talk about DBT, I know you love DBT so much, they talk about this concept of the wise mind, and that's like a 3-part thing too. So it's like your reasonable mind, your emotional mind, and then your wise mind, which kind of represents the ego. So this is DBT completely rips this off. I mean, blatantly rips this thing off, right?
Dude, don't get Marshall Linningham after us. What are you doing?
I know, she's meditating on a rock right now, so, and not listening to
blast. Is it also kind of if you were to think about it in like terms of the brain, the id is fueled by like the amygdala and like that instant gratification piece, and then the superego is like the rationalization that happens in the prefrontal cortex.
Oh yeah, just dumb it down for everybody, Dave.
And then the ego is like whatever decision you end up making based on the rationalization. Like,
to me, it's like the ego is you. People get so wrapped up in like, oh, I had this terrible thought, and they think that's them, right? Or like the rules in their head, and so it's like the id and the super ego are. I almost think of them as like intrusive thoughts, and then the ego is just like taking these suggestions and saying, I think I'm going to go this way. Sometimes when I think of, the amount of thoughts and anxiety we have in our head, I always think about it as like a ship, and the crew is steering the ship in a certain way, and maybe they're about to crash into the rocks. The ego is the one saying like, I don't think this is the way to go. I know my body's leaving me this way. I know my body's telling me I should be scared of this, or I should have anxiety about this, but I know that the right move for me is to steer the ship this way. And what Freud says, now I'm just remembering that quote now, is the ego is not master of its own house. That means you're in your brain and you're not even in charge. So how do we fix that? Right? We got to look and see like, what are the things in our unconscious that are controlling our behavior? And when he thinks of the unconscious, I mentioned it earlier, he thinks of it in like terms of an iceberg where, however much of the iceberg is underwater, most of it, right? Like 75, 85, 90% of the iceberg is underwater. And it's just the tip sticking out. And if that's not Freudian, I don't know what is. We're going to have a hard time with that. And, that's your conscious mind. And that's how little control we really have over our processes. And he just wants us to have more. And with that, Dave, I will pass on to you the stages of development.
Okay. Yeah. So we have a few stages here. I will start off with our earliest one, which is the oral stage. This is the age range of birth to 1 year. Your erogenous zone in this stage is your mouth. And essentially the reason here is an infant's primary source of interaction occurs through its mouth, which is really gross to think about, but it's true. Yeah. So it's vital for eating. It gets pleasure from the oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. Why did I get this
Freud.
part? Yeah,
I know. I did this on purpose. This is a tough one, dude. You're talking about babies in like erogenous zones.
I know. Very uncomfortable. I got to take a shower after this. So the child's reliant on the caretakers and develops a sense of trust and comfort through this oral stimulation. I really think he's hitting on something really important here because, as we've talked about with our reactive attachment disorder, like think about what happens when there's a disruption to early caretaking, and how that lack of trust that the individual develops with reactive attachment and stuff like that.
Dude, reactive attachment is such an interesting thing that you're bringing that up, especially after we just talked about. So what happened with Beth Thomas, our famous reactive attachment episode, is I think she did not develop a super ego. So she did not have the moral compass. That was
Mm.
not, that has to be taught. So I think you're born with an id, and the super ego has to be given to you in childhood, and you develop your own ego.
Yeah, you are taught values. Like people say, oh, they know the difference between right and wrong. You know what? Maybe some people really don't. If you're not
They
taught it
certainly
and
do not.
it's not modeled, then you're gonna try to stab your brother and all that other stuff that she was doing, which
Yeah.
was crazy. Yeah. The primary conflict at this age is weaning off dependency of your caretakers because you're so dependent on them to get all your needs met, right? If the fixation occurs at this age, Freud believed that the individual would have issues with dependency or aggression. Oral fixation can result in problems with drinking, eating, smoking, or nail biting.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so that's got holes in it, but
Yeah, for sure. The next one, Greg's favorite one, we have the anal stage from ages
okay.
1 to 3. The
How do you know it was my
erogenous,
favorite?
you always talk about this one. The erogenous zone is in your bowel and your bladder control. So the primary focus of the libido is on controlling the bladder and the bowel movements.
Mhm.
Major conflict is toilet training. The child needs to learn to control their bodily needs. Developing control, I think this is an interesting thing, leads to sense of accomplishment and independence. I never really thought of it that way, but I guess, yeah, it's like, damn, I just nailed that.
Yeah.
I can pee in a potty now. Um, so to Freud, success at this stage was dependent on the parents' approach to toilet training, and parents who utilize praise and rewards for using the toilet at an appropriate age encourage positive outcomes and help children feel capable and productive.
Okay.
The positive experiences during the toilet training are the basis for people to become competent, productive, and creative adults. I never really put that much emphasis on what toilet training meant until I heard about this.
Does it have to see Freud's kind of a freak in a way, because it doesn't have to be just the toilet. There's lots of instances in a
Well, and
child's
also,
development.
how did he develop this? Like, where did he come up with this being that one thing?
Mm,
Like, how many kids did he study?
right.
Like, did he just take people's like stories?
Yeah, it's like if someone comes in for conversion disorder, they can't move. They're like, well,
And who remembers about their toilet training as a kid between 1 and 3? I don't remember anything from 1 and 3.
no,
Do you remember one thing from 1 to 3?
no,
No. The answer is no. Yeah.
no, I don't.
So inappropriate responses around toilet training can result in negative outcomes, such as if they're too lenient, anal expulsion personality could develop, in which an individual has a messy, wasteful, and destructive personality. But if they're too strict or the toilet training is too early, two totally different things, but we're connecting them. Anal retentive personality, which, I'm sure many people have heard that phrase before, where like the individual is very stringent, orderly, rigid, obsessive, things like that. These are like big labels to be throwing on the success of the potty training.
And it's all a little too metaphoric. Like even with the oral stages where it's like, if you overeat as a child, then you could be gullible because you'll swallow anything. That seems a little bit, or like, if you're messy eating, you could be, argumentative because that's, or oral aggressiveness. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Greg's second favorite stage is the phallic stage, which happens between ages 3 and 6,
Mhm.
because he loves his erogenous zone, which is the
That's right.
genitals.
Yeah, it was close call.
Primary focus of the libido is on your genitals. The children at this age discover the difference between male and females. And Freud believed that boys will start to view their fathers as rivals for their mother's attention during this stage. And this is like where the Oedipus complex comes in and describes those feelings of wanting to possess the mother and the desire to replace the father. So,
At 3 to 6.
yeah, he's not talking about sexual, he's talking about possession.
Mm,
Like, I want her all to myself, you know?
yeah.
So the child fears punishment by the father for those feelings, and that's called castration anxiety. Like, oh
I
no.
wonder what Freud would say, since this comes from a time where like the nuclear family is pretty solid, like a growing up with like a single dad or something like that. Like he must
Or
have a
two
field day.
dads.
Yeah, like what
or
would
two
he say to
moms
that?
or a single mom. Yeah. Yeah, Freud. Where
Freud,
you
what do you
at?
do about that?
Where you at? So, as you mentioned earlier, girls in this stage, they might develop penis envy. So he feels that it's never fully resolved and that all women remain somewhat fixated on this stage. They never really get over that.
And how does he make the case for that? Like, how do you see that in women? Like, what behavior makes him think that they have penis envy?
I don't know.
I don't either. So here's the thing: there was another psychologist at the time who said, men actually have womb envy.
Yes.
Unfortunately, yeah, and her
Well,
name
that
was
was written as like a counter to like, so obviously this is the part of, well, one of the parts of Freud's teachings that becomes a little bit like gets challenged, looks like a little controversial. So yeah, I feel like it was almost like a rebuttal to like, oh
yeah.
yeah, well, what
You
about
know her
womb
name was?
envy? Yeah,
Unfortunately, her name was Dr. Horny, and
yeah.
that's true.
I believe it was Hornier.
Okay, so that's my fault then. And so these kinds of ideas is why the unconscious is great and everything, but like Jung and Adler and Frankl are like, I don't know.
You
I
know
don't
what?
think,
We'll just let him have this one.
yeah, you can have all the weird infantile sex stuff,
You can
and
have
we'll move on.
the baby erogenous zone stuff, and we'll just
Yeah,
do this adult stuff over here.
yeah, because Freud. I mean, we talked about it in the dream. I mean, Jung talked about it, and we mentioned it in the dream episode where he said that he had a dream. Jung had a dream where he went to the basement and Freud was in this little basement and he noticed a door and Jung was able to go down deeper into the basement and it was huge. So I think that was Jung's way of saying, hey, look, Freud found this thing, the unconscious, but he's really stuck in, I think, his own unconscious. What we
Yeah,
really need to explore is everyone's, we're all different. So maybe that's your thing. And I think for Freud, and you described it perfectly, how he had a lot of sexual repression, so he never addressed that
yeah.
ever.
I
He
heard
just
in
everybody's that
Jung's
way.
dream, he went into the basement and there was a door. He opened the door. Behind that door was Freud and a bunch of 3 to 6 year olds, and then he
Yeah,
closed the door really quickly and ran back upstairs.
yeah, dude. It's just Freud like writing on the wall like moms and butts and phallics.
There's one more part to this period that gets even crazier. So
Okay.
I don't know if it's crazier, but it's still weird. The child eventually identifies with the same sex parent
Mhm.
as a means of vicariously possessing the other parent. So if I am trying to possess my mom, I'm going to then start to identify with my dad so I can live through him as he possesses my mom. And like nobody's throwing out the idea of like we're saying that our parents possess each other. Like that's a weird thing too, but whatever. I
Hmm.
guess it's very old fashioned and I'm
Different
more
time.
more new wave, you know what I'm
You
saying?
are. Yeah.
Uh, so obviously very controversial stage. It's considered demeaning to women, but whatever. We'll move on.
There's so much of this that's demeaning to women, and I think we do have to address that a little bit because it's all wrong. It's just like he just missed the mark on that stuff.
I even what I said, like that little example of not wanting his bride to be to read Don Quixote,
Yeah. Wow.
because he likes that, huh? It was sexy. Because he didn't like. It's almost like he felt like she couldn't handle it, or women will read it and they'll get some feelings. It's a very yeah. What's the word I'm looking for, Greg? You know what I'm trying to say. It,
Misogynistic.
misogynistic. Yes, it's
Yeah.
very misogynistic view.
But here's what I honestly think with men. I mean, throughout, we talked about this in Salem. I think men really fear women because Freud obviously had like a deep sexual desire for women. And, even, lately I've been like reading like Paradise Lost and stuff. I'm not going to go off the rails here, but like the big thing was like, Eve was beautiful and that was all great, great, great. Everyone loved that until they acquired knowledge and they were like, well, what if I lose her? What if she wants someone else? Then I'm gonna be hurt forever. So I have to somehow like demean this. It's like a narcissist thing. Like a
So
narcissist doesn't think they're better. They just bring them down so they make themselves feel better. I think it's sort of like the incel guys. Freud would almost be in that category where they've had a hard time getting women and maintaining women. They're afraid of women because they could lose them, and they're jealous of, how they could have, sex freely or whatever. And so they hate them. The hate is a weird thing because it's like you really want them. So, but you don't think you can have them. So then you
Yeah.
hate them. It's a really dark thing.
Well, it goes back to the dark psychology stuff where if you put somebody beneath you, you find ways to demean them. You find ways to keep them, at bay. They can never advance. So then you never have to worry about losing them because you can always keep them if you keep them under you.
That's exactly right. And we almost did that as a society.
Yeah.
To women, and it's just things have changed quite a bit, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. The latent period, 6 to puberty, sexual feelings are inactive during this time. The super ego starts to develop during this stage, while the id's energies are suppressed. So it's more about making social connections, development of communication skills, self-confidence. So this is really where the development of the ego and the superego contribute to developing like a period of calm for an individual. So you go from like this crazy hyper person kid to more of becoming like a social creature, right?
Yeah.
So it's time of exploration in which sexual energy is repressed or dormant. The energy is then sublimated into other areas such as intellectual pursuits and social interactions. Totally not how I see most kids in puberty, but okay.
Yeah. Growing
All right,
up.
Freud. How many kids did you know, Freud?
Well, Freud was started high school at 9. So
Yeah.
again, Freud putting his own little
Just because
spin on
that's what you were doing, nerd, doesn't mean that's what most 9-year-olds are
Yeah,
doing.
no kidding.
No, but not shout out to anybody who went to high school at 9. That's awesome.
Just Doogie Howser and Freud. That's
Yeah.
it.
So he believed that it's possible for children to become fixated or stuck in this phase, and it can result in an immaturity and inability to form fulfilling relationships as an adult. Don't understand that because he's literally talking about development of relationships and social communication, but that's his belief.
So I do believe in that. So you could be stuck in a developmental stage, either through a trauma or for whatever. Like we talked about that with the Peter Pan and Dorian Gray stuff.
Yeah. Yep. The genital stage is puberty to death. So, Greg, guess what? You're in your genital stage right now.
I love it.
And your erogenous zone is maturing sexual interests.
Okay.
Oh boy.
I think my erogenous zone's calming down these days.
Yeah. Or it's just discovering new ones, new sexual interests. All right. Puberty causes the libido to become active once again. So you're all wound up.
Mm-hmm.
During this final stage, the individual develops a strong sexual interest in the opposite sex. Obviously that's arguable for some people. Stage lasts throughout the rest of the person's life. So you're just all horned up forever. Interest in the welfare of others grows during this stage. So I'm not only interested in having sex with them, I also kind of care about how they're going to do and stuff.
What do you think it is about Freud that he literally is all horned up forever? That's like you could write that. That's your case conceptualization
but
of Freud.
He also cares about your wealth. He does care about your welfare in this stage, according to him. The goal is to establish a balance between various life areas. I don't know what that means, but like, I think that's kind of like what we do. We try to do.
Yeah.
And we fail at it.
Okay.
Like we're always trying to like do different things and like have a good home life, have a good work life, have a good recreational life. And then like,
it's so hard.
Yeah. We put all eggs in the wrong baskets. So
not enough eggs to go around.
Seriously. Something's always going to suffer. Let me just see if there's anything else that's noteworthy here. All right. So if the other stages have been completed successfully, the individual should be a well-balanced, warm, and caring person. Unlike the earlier stages, Freud believed the ego and the superego are fully formed and functioning at this point. The younger children are ruled by the id, which demands immediate satisfaction of the most basic needs and wants, unlike us now.
Right. Well, hopefully.
We hope.
So what about, and when talking about Freud, it's important for us to talk about the levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
Very important to talk about that.
Yeah. So we have the unconscious, which is this part of the psyche that contains repressed ideas and images, as well as primitive desires and impulses that have never been allowed to enter the conscious mind. So we have three forms of consciousness. We have conscious, which is there's a small amount of mental activity that we know about. So that's our thoughts and perceptions. We have the preconscious, which are the things we could be aware of if we wanted or tried. So that could be like memories or stored knowledge.
Yeah, like something like something comes up, like, oh, like you smell
go to
something,
trivia,
you're like, oh,
or you go to trivia night and they ask something and it's like,
boom.
oh, I remember that one.
Yep.
And you're not thinking about that on like a regular basis. You're not thinking of like what's the name of the lead singer of Counting Crows. But I knew you would know it. I knew you would know it.
Adam something-owitz.
And who did he date?
Courtney Cox.
Oh, you are such a nerd. All right, yeah. How did I know that you would know those random facts?
I don't know, dude. I don't know. But this is important stuff, right? So it's like
a bunch of people like, who the hell are Counting Crows?
Yeah, probably most people.
All right, and then there's the unconscious. These are things we're unaware of and cannot become aware of them. So their fears, their unacceptable desires, violent motives, irrational wishes, immoral urges, selfish needs. The list goes on. Traumatic experiences for some people, shameful experiences.
Right.
Although I feel like my shameful experiences somehow
right out in front.
They're like in my preconscious / conscious all the time.
You're on the tip of the iceberg for you, and they really should be way down there. So, but the goal for Freud is to take these, these things you're talking about, these memories, this unconscious thoughts and dark desires and all these things. And without therapy, according to Freud, these unconscious phenomena will dictate your behavior. They'll show up symbolically in dreams or physically in symbols. So when they're showing up in your dreams or you're getting symptoms, you need to kind of turn around and face it and dig into what's in the unconscious. That's his whole thing. And he wants you to find something sexual. And I think like that was doing a lot of people a disservice because he's always, it's like, what is that? Bias, right? I mean, it's confirmation bias. He's always looking for this. Oh, yes, it is that sexual thing. It's like, no, wait, hold on. Like you're just gonna like disregard like a trauma or your father never held your hand, or my father would always never let me drink out of a straw. I feel like maybe that is sexual.
Yeah,
but like you know what I mean. That's Freudian for sure. So like I mean, it's there's so much there that is driving our behavior that's not sexual. But
I do believe that he's onto something with the unconscious and how that does drive behavior. It may not be sexual, but there's so much that we do keep locked up in there. I would actually probably argue that it's between unconscious and preconscious because there are things that we probably could remember, but don't always associate with current behaviors or current symptoms that we're experiencing. Right. So like, you could tell me about the straw thing and then like later on tell me about, I don't know, something crazy about how you view something as like not being something a guy should ever do. And I'll be like, well, think about that lesson you were learned with that straw when you were little and how that was drilled into you that like guys don't use straws.
Yeah.
So then you just constantly like associate that with different things.
Yeah, and you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know what like it's.
But that you were taught the lesson that certain things are not for guys.
Right.
And
that's exactly right.
You're denying you're denying your infant stage of wanting to put that straw in your mouth.
You're like, yeah. Are you closing myself in? I'm putting myself in a box.
Yes.
And that's not something that's necessary. So it's like, well, what you're absolutely right. The unconscious.
It's so weird, like how you don't snorkel now, all because you don't want to like breathe through that straw-like thing.
Yeah, like I go for a run and I'm gonna pass away on the ground, and the firefighters come with an inhaler, and I'm like, I don't think so.
Get that away from my mouth.
So yeah, I mean, the unconscious is incredibly important to understand ourselves better, and it's just fun to do. like to have thoughts and try to interpret them, and dreams and try to interpret them. It's just
Yep.
it's a fun exercise to try to like learn yourself.
The other thing that this really brings to light, though, is about repressed memories. And that does happen for people who have gone through traumatic experiences. So he's trying to bring that out. And that's kind of the point of psychoanalysis. It's to make the unconscious conscious.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's
So,
it. The unconscious conscious.
And really to identify how that unconscious mind governs way more of our behavior than we ever really knew. So
most of it.
Yeah. Yep.
No. So Dave,
also this like that just to like go on to something else that you had said, like unconscious also leads to like Freudian slips, which we've referenced several times, but that's like making a statement that could be like, how would you describe a Freudian slip?
I would say I would describe it as saying you're saying something that you're really thinking and you don't even realize it that you're really thinking it. The best Freudian slip is, remember Christmas Vacation, where he's talking to that woman and he's like, she says something about it's nipply outside.
Yeah.
He says like nipple like a bunch of times. So like he's really thinking that, and he's surprising himself that he's even thinking that, that's a Freudian slip.
So it's in our unconscious.
It's in our unconscious and it pops up accidentally. It's slipped into our consciousness.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
All right. Another thing with Freud is defense mechanisms. This I didn't really know that he did a big thing on defense mechanisms. So I feel like I was kind of in the dark about this one. So he argued that when in a psychologically dangerous or threatening situation, a person could likely resort to defense mechanisms for protection. I didn't know he developed a lot of this because a lot of these were ones I already was aware of, but I just didn't know that he had put this into a framework as well.
It's incredible that he did this.
Yeah. So, I mean, did they exist before him?
I mean, it's funny because like it seems so simple, right? Like the unconscious seems so simple, and well, that's kind of unfair, but like defense mechanisms, like they seem obvious, but someone had to put it down.
Yeah.
Someone had to be like,
he put it down.
He put it. Oh my God, Freudian slips it. Going crazy.
All right. So the threat identified as something that challenges a person's self-concept or self-esteem. So initially, these threats were basic drives, specifically sexual and aggressive, that were at odds with the ego. And later refined his theory by shifting focus towards self-esteem preservation, stating that when self-esteem and self-image were challenged or threatened, they would rely on certain cognitive or mental strategies to protect their self-esteem. They may be employed unconsciously, and the person might be unaware that they are even using them or why. And the presence implies that the self-esteem and self-concept feel threatened and need protecting. There's a ton of examples. So we have projection, displacement, sublimation, repression, denial, identification, introjection, undoing, compensation, splitting, suppression, conversion, dissociation, avoidance, isolation, humor, and regression. That's a long list of different types of defense mechanisms. Just really quickly, I was going to like elaborate on a couple of them because I thought that might be helpful. Projection.
Yeah, elaborate. Yeah. Well, I was going to say I agree that you should elaborate on a couple. Rejection.
Projection is when a client's traits threaten their self-concept, but they fail to recognize that they possess these traits, and instead they see the traits in someone else or in other people. So,
so Freud calling everyone a sex weirdo.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He's projecting on us all. Exactly. Displacement is one that I wasn't too familiar with what that was talking about. But it's changing or displacing the original target of a particular impulse to another similar target. It occurs because the response to the initial target is considered unacceptable or impossible, so a more suitable target is found. And I found a great example of this, and it's in so many of like our serial killer or murderer episodes. So if like a person has like intense rage or hatred towards his mother for whatever reason, he kind of understands he can't act on these impulses towards his mother because that would be wrong. So instead, he displaces the feelings about her onto other people, such as other women, maybe that he's dating,
Yeah.
that he's murdering, and he shows them hostility because they embody the same characteristics.
I'm going to say
as his
something you're
mother.
not going to want to hear.
What's that?
I read an article about displacement once a long time ago, and you know who it happens most to?
Who?
Animals.
Oh, that
When people
sucks.
come home and they get, it's their boss. They get in a fight with their boss or something, like they can't take it on the boss. So they come home and like,
On their
I don't know.
pets.
Yeah, they're pets. That's sad.
Be better people.
Yeah, come on. Paul Charpentier does not appreciate that.
No.
He does not. Yeah, so I mean, defense mechanisms are sort of, just these maladaptive responses. I mean, but they're not always maladaptive. Like, some of them are good.
Not all of them. Yeah.
Like sublimation, I think, is the good one where I got so mad I wrote a poem. I mean, how can that be wrong?
Yeah.
Or like you go to the gym or something. There's some of them that are good.
I mean, we all do defense mechanisms.
Yeah, you have to survive, sort of, right? I mean, even to the point, like dissociation is a defense mechanism. Sometimes you don't get to choose that one. Avoidance is one you do get to choose.
Yes.
But they go on and on. So what do you think, Dave? I mean, we could probably go on all day, and I don't know if we should.
No, I don't think we should actually. I think
Okay.
think we touched on a lot of topics.
Yeah, I wanted to get into like transference and countertransference, and like, I had a lot of other thoughts about Freud, but I think honestly, we kind of really got to the bottom of it. I did want to bring something interesting up that I read, and I think this is kind of controversial, so I wanted to why not bring it up on the Freud episode? I think we've both noticed this, and he wrote that sometimes there are some classes of people, and I'm just going to leave it, whatever, that they're resistant to let go of their neurosis or whatever's bothering them, their depression, their anxiety, whatever, because it helps them.
Yeah.
Where do you see? I mean, we see that so much with like people trying to get like a disability or something like that. And that sucks. That's a difficult.
I had somebody tell me recently that they loved the attention they got when they were hospitalized and they were considered sick because they were cutting and they got an infection from that, sepsis.
Yeah.
And then the response afterwards, everyone had sympathy and everyone was like very nice and understanding to them, and they liked that attention. And it was like, oh, that's a terrible takeaway.
That sounds a little Munchausen to me.
Yeah.
Although I do know what you're talking about.
Do you?
So, yeah, that's Freud, huh? So, like I said, I mean, the framework's there. We do. So, what do you think for Freud? There's a lot of obviously negative components to Freud, but he's controversial for sure. But I don't think that we're sitting across from people trying to help them with their issues had it not been for Freud's work.
Yeah, I mean, we have to take appreciation for what he started, what he's created, what he's, contributed to. There has to be a starting point, and we can't expect, the views of someone almost 100 years ago to be, the way we understand them today. We wouldn't expect that of anybody. Anybody in science, we would never expect them to have it all nailed down.
But any kind of medicine or anything like that, we have to refine it over time. And you also have to refine it to match, the shifting societal norms.
Yeah. I said 100. I said almost 100 years ago, way over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
What years were we talking for like his development in psychoanalysis?
I mean, probably, early 1900s.
Yeah. Okay.
So about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago.
So we didn't touch on countertransference and transference. I think that's worth us dabbling in probably in another episode at some point. Okay. That's interesting stuff. What do you think?
I think it's pretty interesting. I didn't go crazy with it here, so I don't know what that says. But I will. So one more thing about Freud. An important quote. For if there's anything to take away, he sort of comes to the conclusion that out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength. I think that's an important thing, right? The things that you think stink about you, those are the things that are probably going to be worthwhile down the road, right?
I mean, it's a hopeful thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that will be.
Well, Dave, I remember like for you, I remember you used to be like, oh, I was subconscious about my curly hair. And now everyone's like, Dave's so stunning with his curly hair.
Yeah, everyone's saying that. It's insane. Wow.
It's just me writing that in the bathroom at work. All right.
So yeah, yeah. All right. So I keep thinking about how we didn't touch on that transference stuff, and like
I can
there's
touch on
something-
it really quick.
I think we should save it actually, because I do think there's an interesting thing there, because I don't think people, like, some of it is also talking about the therapist relationship, and I think that that's interesting for people to hear, because I don't think people understand that. And I don't think you could until you're in that position. When you're sitting across from someone and you get a feeling about that person, and I'm not talking like a romantic feeling, but you can almost sense what other people probably feel around that person.
Yeah. I think that's an important tool.
Yeah.
Because
And then you could
the way a
point to-
person makes you feel is the way they're making other people feel too.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting for people to hear, because sometimes that can get misinterpreted.
Hmm.
So we'll save that.
We'll save it. All right. Well, that's Freud.
That is Freud. So we took a week off. Kind of not planned. We didn't release an episode last week for the start of 2024. We took a week off.
That's on me.
That's fine. I think that's fine. There's 5 weeks in January. We're going to do 4 out of the 5. That's totally fine. But I just want to appreciate everybody for, continuing to use that time to listen to back episodes and everything else that you guys did, to continue supporting our show. We appreciate it. If you want to support it further, obviously we're always asking for ratings and reviews on any of the podcast streaming platforms, but also we have a subscriptions page. It's in our link on our Instagram, or you can find it if you look up Buzzsprout Unconventional Therapist Guide to Nothing. There's a subscription page there. Even just contributing a couple bucks a month is a huge help to us to kind of further our ability to do research and just develop the show more and more, which is kind of our goal. So yeah, that's some ways to support. Greg, you have anything else for the audience?
I don't. Just appreciate I appreciate the continued support. What more can I say? It really means a lot to us, especially having to take a week off for a little family emergency. Everything's all good, but I appreciate everyone hanging in there with us, and I appreciate Dave's grace and
the grace.
Yeah, the grace
Thanks.
of Dave. Hey, we're a couple Catholic boys. Well, we used to be.
I guess, yeah. Well, yeah, maybe that's a... All right. Everybody, thank you for listening. We will be back next week. We're hitting off 2024 with Freud. That's a big one. So we're only going up from there, everyone.
That's it.
But we'll see you next week. Have a great night. Peace.